Yo, what's going on, guys? It's me, Jay. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on some tragic news that happened today here in New York City. Um, the death of Malika Shabazz, the youngest daughter of civil rights leader Malcolm X, found um, dead in her apartment at the age of 56. Yeah, this is really tragic and sad. One because she's his youngest daughter. Two, because like Mayor Bill de Blasio said, um, the family itself, the Shabazz family, Malcolm's family, has been through a tremendous amount of tragedy, even before Malcolm X was Malcolm X. You know, with the death of his father, the way the father was killed by the KKK, um, with the mental anguish that the mother went through. Hey, Elise, what's going on? Being in the being um, in a mental hospital after the father was killed, then Malcolm himself being shot right in front of his daughters in 1965 in the Audubon Ballroom. Then how the grandmother, Betty Shabazz, uh, passed away, how she was tragically murdered by the grandson. Then the grandson, uh, Malcolm Shabazz, turns his life around. And then in 2016, I think it was 2016 or 2015, he himself gets murdered in Mexico. Now, this, not to mention that the oldest daughter, Kabila, also has struggled with mental issues. And on the heels of coming out of these two men, Malcolm Muhammad Aziz, and the other gentleman, two men being exonerated 2 days ago on the death of, on the murder of her father. It's crazy that one family can suffer so many tragedies. But also keep in mind what this family represented, um, as far as resistance to the system of white supremacy. Not only Malcolm himself, not only the grandson that was killed in Mexico, that when he turned his life around, he himself started to advocate for black civil rights and advocate for the struggle. But before Malcolm, even Earl Little, the father of Malcolm X himself, was an associate of Marcus Garvey and was back in the 30s and 40s advocating for black civil rights. Even back then, that's why the KKK wanted to kill him in both in Nebraska and in Michigan. So way down deep in the roots of El Haj Malik Shabazz, aka Malcolm X, was a resistance to fight even before he himself and even after he himself went on and passed away. There was that resistance. He was a resistance fighter. He was the spirit that was going to fight against the system. I remember Lisa was to. It's good that Lisa's on this live because Lisa was telling me that her mom had gone to. I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa. The funeral of Betty Shabazz in Harlem in 1998. And That shocked me. When that happened so tragically. Um, so just this family has been through a lot, you know. But one thing I wanted to say, for years and years after Malcolm's murder, people always said, people in the Nation of Islam always said that there was more to the murder of Malcolm X, that it wasn't just the argument or the dispute or the falling out that he had with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that it was more to him being murdered, that the government and that the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover and stuff was involved in it. And everybody always believed that, well, of course they're going to say that because they're the Nation of Islam. He not only denounced the Nation of Islam, but he was about to expose the illicit affairs that Elijah Muhammad had with his secretaries, and I believe did expose it. Um, but for years, people said, even back then in Harlem in the 60s, the Nation of Islam, people believed back then, that the Nation of Islam had something to do with it. And for years, the Nation of Islam, like I said, always was like, nah, it really wasn't us. Yeah, we might have put in the papers that Malcolm deserved to die and that Malcolm was a traitor to the Nation of Islam and to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but we didn't actually put soldiers on the ground to kill Malcolm. You know, of course, Kabila didn't believe that because she actually stalked Louis Farrakhan and tried to kill Louis Farrakhan. She herself bought into that narrative that it was the Nation of Islam. The movie Malcolm X that Spike Lee made makes no mention of um, the, goes with the narrative that it was the government. It makes no mention that the Nation of Islam had anything to do with it. Of course, a lot of people in the conscious community say that it was not the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam didn't have nothing to do with it. What I believe is that um, people might have been inspired by some of the things that Elijah Muhammad and Louis Farrakhan at the time, who was Louis Farrakhan, was a student of Malcolm X. He was in Malcolm X's original mosque that in Massachusetts, and then he moved and became the head minister of Temple Number 7, which was Malcolm's mosque in Harlem, which is the Alhaj Malik Shabazz Masjid. They might have said things that were inflammatory. They might have denounced Malcolm. They might have called him a traitor, and they might have said things that they shouldn't have. But I never really believed that they really had the infrastructure set in place to actually murder him. I think the government was gonna murder him. Government was out to murder him. FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. So certainly the Nation of Islam did not help the situation by the things that they said, but I don't believe that the Nation of Islam were the ones that killed Malcolm. I never really believed that. They didn't have the capability to do such things. Did they have the will to do it? Maybe so, because of the things that he was saying about um, Elijah Muhammad and the things he was saying about the Nation of Islam once he left. But did they have the capability to do it? It's sort of like when you have a beef here on YouTube, right? And you have a huge following, and you say things like, man, I wish that guy or I wish that other YouTuber was dead, right? And then that person turns up dead. People might say that you had something to do with it, even if you didn't, just by your inflammatory remarks towards that individual or the falling out that you had with them. But maybe it wasn't you. Because although Malcolm didn't lead the movement of the Nation of Islam, he was such a more articulate, more outspoken individual, way more outspoken and way more better spoken, in my opinion, than the. I'm sorry, anybody that's in the Nation of Islam, but in my opinion, Malcolm X was more outspoken and more articulate and a more better communicator of the message of the Nation of Islam than the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. You know, the the student was better than the teacher in this case. So when the government looked at a representative of the ideology of the black Muslims or the Nation of Islam, they looked at Malcolm X as the representative, as the face, because of how much more better he was at communicating the message of Islam, that particular brand of Islam, than Elijah. Because before Malcolm X came out of prison and really started to put his knowledge and his swing on it, the Nation of Islam was a small group. It wasn't that large. It wasn't on the national stage like people were actually talking about it. Just like with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Martin Luther King's movement. People were doing that before Martin Luther King was doing it, but Martin Luther King was so articulate and so much more better spoken and so much more charismatic that he became the face of it. And when you become the face of a movement like that, the government is going to say, well, you're the guy behind it. You're the guy that is the face of it, and you're the guy we're going to take out. Because remember, J. Edgar Hoover, at that time, the head of the FBI, go watch the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio that came out a couple of years ago. What he wanted to do was, what his mission was to prevent the rise of what he called the Black Messiah, somebody that will lead um, black people. So he was targeting all these groups, all these conscious groups, the Nation of Islam, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the Black Panthers, because, well, first of all, because he was doing the government's bidding and it was a government agency, but also because, well, he was just racist. So what they did was they infiltrated these groups and they destroyed these groups from within by causing a lot of dissension amongst these groups and by taking out the heads of these groups. In the case of the Black Panthers, they took out Fred Hampton in Chicago. In the case of the Nation of Islam, they took out Malcolm X. In the case of course, Martin Luther King murder, they took out Martin Luther King. They also targeted um, the Hispanic movements like the Young Lords. Go look at it, COINTELPRO. While at the same time, hypocritically, um, they were looking the other way when it came to organized crime and the mafia. Lisa says, it's sad that they don't really teach about Malcolm X in school, but of course they aren't going to teach that because they brand him as a racist and they brand him as anti white. But when they do teach it, they always focus on when he went to the Hajj and when he went to Mecca and suddenly discovered, wow, there are blonde hair, blue eyed Muslims, just as there are black Muslims. That's false because even within the Nation of Islam, in their main book that they teach, Message to the Black Man, which was written by Elijah Muhammad, it 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 teaches you that there are Muslims of every color. So he already knew that. What he wasn't really aware of was how offensive him saying, number one, him saying that um Allah or God appeared in the person of Master Farad is really offensive to Orthodox Muslims. Two, him saying that Elijah Muhammad was a messenger of God is really offensive to Orthodox Islam. Because according to Orthodox Islam, God is not a person. That's the difference between Islam and Christianity. And two, uh, there are no messengers after the Prophet Muhammad that was existing 1400 years ago. Anything things outside of that will be considered as heretical and outside of the fold of Islam and will be considered as shirk. But that kind of Islam, that kind of Sunni, what they call Sunni Islam, was not taught um, in the United States and in the West more generally. So this kind of Islam, this different kind of brand of Islam developed here in the United States, not just by Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, but even by Noble Drew Ali. Noble Drew Ali was the first to introduce this different kind of brand of Islam to America in 1913 with the founding of the Moorish Science Temple. You know, and so um, that's really what he discovered was different about Islam. Not necessarily that he found out, wow, there's white Muslims. They knew already that there was white people that were Muslims. Even within the lessons, the Supreme Wisdom lessons, the 120s that the Nation of Islam teaches, they teach that there's white people that are Muslims. Even that Master Farad Muhammad's mother was a white person from the Caucasus Mountains that was a Muslim. So it was no big revelation. Oh wow, I didn't know there was such a thing as white Muslims. People in the Nation of Islam And uh, these kind of Muslims knew that was white people that were Muslims. It was a well-known fact. What they didn't know was how offensive Master Farad calling himself Allah was to Orthodox Muslims, or Elijah Muhammad calling himself the messenger of Allah was to Orthodox Muslims. Or they didn't know how to really pray. They didn't know how to do the things that Orthodox Muslims do. Pray, salat, and get on their knees. When they pray like this, what an Orthodox Muslim would call dua and not salat. You know what I mean? So they didn't have the knowledge and the practice of Orthodox Islam and the Aqidah, the creed of Orthodox Islam. That was the difference. You know what I mean? But schools here, the curriculum here focuses on the racial. Oh, well, he suddenly became a non-racist. You know, when he went to Hajj and all of a sudden he became not racist. No, he just discovered the Orthodox practices of Islam, which Elijah Muhammad's own son had left the nation of Islam multiple times because he disagreed with the way Islam was practiced and taught by his own father. And then when his father died, he switched over to Orthodox Islam. You know what I mean? So it wasn't so much the component about teaching that the white man is the devil. You know what I mean? That made Malcolm switch over. It was the corruption within the organization that made him to switch. And, you know, just wanting to be a better Muslim. There's a lot of people that went the other direction. You know, in Harlem itself, with the Nation of Gods and Earths. Okay, they said that not just that Farad was Allah in the flesh, but that all members of the Nation of Islam was Allah by nature. That's how the 5%ers separated from the because they said the same thing. They were like, you know, we have this knowledge, and the knowledge is not being taught. The teachings of the Nation of Islam, the supreme wisdom lessons, were not being taught to the young people. You had to be a Muslim in order to learn these lessons. Otherwise, you wasn't being taught that lesson. So what the founder of the 5%ers did was he took it to the regular people that wasn't Muslim, and he taught them, especially the young people. And they went the other direction, where Malcolm went to the Orthodox Muslims, the Sunnis. The 5%ers went to the other direction. They said, well, we're not gonna just worship a picture of Farad, because how is worshiping a picture of Farad Muhammad, any different than worshiping a picture of Jesus, like the Christians do? That's still a mystery God, as they would formulate it in their lexicon. So they went in the other direction, while Malcolm's followers went more orthodox. The 5%ers in the Nation of Gods and Earths went more unorthodox, something that even Elijah and the people in the Nation of Islam wasn't even teaching. You know, so there was a split in that three-way direction. But Malcolm's movement never really got off the ground, because once he passed away, his organization, once he was murdered, his organization, uh, Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and his secular organization that he was going to work with a lot of Pan Africanist leaders um, about Africa and stuff, and a lot of mainstream civil rights leaders like Adam Clayton Powell Jr. and uh, even Martin Luther King. It never really got off the ground because he was assassinated. The leader of 5% Nation, too, Clarence 13X Smith, aka Father Allah, or the Father, he was also murdered. But his students, his 9 students took it further, and their movement didn't die out like Malcolm's did, and like the original Nation of Islam. The original Nation of Islam did die out because Elijah Muhammad's son took over and he took it into Orthodox Islam. And then in 1975, Louis Farrakhan revived the old original teachings of the nation, and it exists as it is today. It remains to be seen. No, I'm not surprised, Lisa, because again, a lot of these murders, like for example, like I just said, even uh, Father Allah, that he was killed in Harlem as well, and his murder was unsolved. Biggie, Tupac, all these high profile black celebrities, the murders unsolved. They don't really care necessarily about um, the murder of black influential leaders. I mean, hell, do we even know really if Khalid Muhammad, who was an influential leader when I was young in New York, he had all the young kids rallied up and conscious when I was younger in the Million Youth March in 1998. And people say he died of cancer or something, right? But how do we know that's true? You know what I mean? And we really haven't seen any really influential black leaders since Khalid Muhammad, really. Yeah, you got your Tariq Nasheeds, your Omar Johnsons, and your mainstream leaders like the people that run Black Lives Matter. But these people that are running the Black Lives Matters and all that, uh, they have government support. They have the support of the Democratic Party, the support of the establishment. They don't. They're not running against the grain, independent like the Nation of Islam was, like Malcolm X's movement really was, like the 5% Nation really was. They had the support of the mainstream. So how are they anti-establishment when they're in the house of the establishment? You could say, well, yeah, Martin Luther King's movement, Southern Christian leadership had the support of the mainstream Democrats too. Not really, not at first. They had it later, you know what I mean, but not really. And then when Malcolm and them uh, started to speak against, and even Martin Luther King, when he started to speak against the Vietnam War and started speaking against President Lyndon Johnson, then they didn't have the support of the Democrats anymore, right? So it was different than the people that run the Black Lives Matters organization today, where they could sit down with President Biden and Biden's going to agree with everything they have to say. And as far as the other wing, like the Tariq Nasheeds and the Omar Johnsons and all these people just talk. You know, like they don't do really anything. They just talk about establishing schools, or talk about establishing businesses, talk about ancient Egypt and all this other stuff. There's not really, it's relevant in a sense that yes, you want to teach young black kids a sense of power, a sense of empowerment, a sense of pride, right? But at the same time, how much can you continue to talk about the past to the point? Okay, yeah, if we've established the stolen black history, we've established the stolen black legacy, but what are you gonna do today? What are you gonna do that's relevant today? That's gonna help the people today, the people in the lost cities like the Chicagos and the St. Louis's and the New Yorks that are struggling with gang violence and gang self-hate. How is learning that the pharaohs were all black people, or something that Mansa Musa did? How's that really gonna help me to help me as a somebody in 2021? You know what I mean? People are not trying to hear that. You know what I mean? So you got the Omar Johnsons and the Tariq Nasheeds that they all talk about this stuff, but that's all they do is talk. They never move beyond talk. You know what I mean? And that was something that Malcolm X himself he had a he had an issue with. Even within the Nation of Islam at that time. Okay, yeah, we're talking about all this, and they're establishing these businesses, small businesses, but they were only for Muslims. You know what I mean? So he wanted to move beyond just for Muslims. He wanted to make something that was, you didn't have to be registered in the Nation of Islam to be a part of this change that Malcolm was about to talk about. And it was beyond rhetoric. And that's the problem with today. These conscious leaders, the conscious community, so called, talk. You know what I mean? That's all I see is talk from these individuals like this. You know, and so, and if it ain't talk, if it is action, it's tied in with the politicians, tied in with the Democrats, married to the Democrats, like BLM, and the other side, the Hassan Campbells, the Tariqs, and the Omar Johnsons, they're just talking about it. So when kids don't have no other alternative, they turn to other things. They're like, oh, you know, forget what these guys talking about. They just talking. You know what I mean? They just marching. They ain't doing. They ain't about nothing. You know what I mean? I don't really care necessarily. This is the mentality of the young people. They don't really care necessarily that you talking about pharaohs and Mansa Musa and shit that happened 1,500, 1,600 years ago. So what? Put some paper in my pocket. That's what they're talking about. That's the language they're speaking. And that's the thing with these conscious groups is that they're not talking the language of the young people. They're talking the language of themselves. They're only speaking to themselves. Rightly or wrongly, the other side, the other side, the people that are racist, the white supremacists, they're able to speak to their young people. They're able to speak to the Kyle Rittenhouses of the world that want to do some wicked shit. They're able to speak to those young people. They're able to speak to their language, and their young people respond accordingly. But the young people on our end, the young righteous folk, Young people ain't trying to hear what they gotta say. Man, hell with you. You just old. What did Kanye West say? People said, old folks talking about back in my day. Well, homie, this is my day. you know, you know. So that's the difference between today's leaders, both mainstream civil rights leaders and Malcolm X's era, is that they were able to speak to the young people. They were able to reach the young people. Today's civil rights leaders, be it the BLMs or the conscious community, is not able to speak to the young people. Young people are not trying to hear that. But on the other end, the white supremacists, the hatred end, they are reaching their young, they are reaching the youth of their side. So it's just sad. You know what I mean? Because the difference was Malcolm, yes, he was conscious, yes, he became a member of the Nation of Islam, but he was able, because of his street experience, his street expertise, to reach the young people in many cities, in all the cities, but especially in New York. You know what I mean? Like the level that these conscious leaders are at is like what Elijah Muhammad was at before Malcolm got out of jail. Yeah, he was able to reach some people, you know what I mean? But he wasn't able to reach a lot of the people, you know what I mean? He had a small group until Malcolm brought the street smarts into it, and he was able to reach a lot of the people. And that's the difference. So that's why I think they want to. It took him 60 years to find those guys guilty because he was a real threat. Because imagine he'd have start now that he wasn't really um, tied to any religious organization or any religious orthodoxy. Imagine if he'd have start speaking to everybody, people that wasn't Muslim, people non-Muslim, people that wasn't even African Americans, maybe speaking to Hispanics, speaking to young conscious white people. It would have been a movement that was unstoppable for the establishment at that time because of the way he was so his charisma, his ability to speak. So that's why they felt like I felt like he needed to be stopped. They felt like he needed to be stopped. And that's why I believe schools don't really speak about him a lot. Because he was if you could have put Martin Luther King's action or Martin Luther King's reach to the rhetoric and words of Malcolm and the fear that the establishment had of the Black Panthers, if you could have put all the three together, the Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm, Malcolm's rhetoric, Malcolm's strictness, Malcolm's straightforwardness, if you could have put that, all the three together, the the image of the Black Panthers, the reach of Martin Luther King, and the rhetoric and the strictness of Malcolm all together and remove the religious element out of it because not everybody was gonna become Muslims. You know what I mean? Um, you would have had really something incredible um, on your hands. But unfortunately, uh, the government and the other side, the right wingers and stuff at that time, was able to create the sanction that destroyed these organizations from within. And no organizations since that time that are on some positive stuff have been able to rise up and replace it. And Lisa, you're absolutely 100% right. We see it in every walk of life. A lot of times the teacher does surpass the student, and that was the case with Malcolm. And that's why he was so dangerous to the people, because it was like, okay, yeah, now he's not going to still reach Muslims. He's going to reach a whole swath of people, a whole gang of people, if you will, that are not Muslims. Anyway, guys, peace. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And assalamu alaikum to um, the Muslims, and rest in peace to Malikah Shabazz, the daughter of the late Malcolm X. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant her Jannah. Peace.